The first question we need to start off with, of course, is what exactly is a style? Well, there's a lot of different ways that people answer this question, but a short way to remember it is that a style simply is a collection of formatting. Now, I think you can see through all of the things that we've already done in this series that formatting can also mean a lot of things. We have font formatting, paragraph formatting, even page formatting. So yes, all of these can be encapsulated inside of a style, and that's partly why they're so powerful. In addition, we can also kind of blend this out by saying that styles include several other things. First of all, styles are always named. We're going to give them a name, hopefully that means something to us. If we use the built-in styles, then they have more generic names like heading 1 and heading 2, but you can see that even just the name heading tells us what type of thing it should be used for. Styles, of course, are also saved. That means that we can reuse them, and of course, there comes in the next point, which is they are reusable. We create them once, and we can use them many, many times. As I mentioned, we also have two different options here. Word comes with several built-in styles, or we can create custom styles all our own. The next question that people often present, or actually the next issue that they present is, what if I don't want to use styles? Well, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news and the bad news is that every instance of text in Word uses a style. So, whether you think you want to use one or not, you actually are. You don't have a choice. The point here is, though, that even if you don't know what styles are, you already have been using them. So instead of thinking of this as being some type of new thing that you have to learn, an additional skill that you have to be aware of, you're really just enhancing your knowledge of something that already exists. And as we'll see, this is going to give you a lot more options as you work. One of the important reasons for using styles is that they become an integral part of many of the templates and professional documents that we already use. They're also going to help us with several key points of document production, and that includes being efficient, being consistent, automating our work, and also helping us organize our work. What you'll also see is that styles become necessary to use some of the features that Word offers, or to optimize others that we may or may not be familiar with or using at the moment. We'll go ahead and take a deeper look at these in just a few seconds. If you're still not convinced, let me see if I can do a little bit more. First of all, we talked about efficiency. Efficiency comes about in a couple of ways. First of all, there's going to be no need to manually format stuff. And if we don't have to manually format it, in other words, we don't have to apply 3 or 4 things to multiple pieces of text, that's going to obviously make us more efficient. In addition, it also allows us to easily change or update styles. So if we thought we wanted a heading to look a certain way, and then we change our mind, we can actually go in and change all of the headings, whether there's 1 or 100 throughout the document, with one simple step. That, of course, makes us much more efficient, and the work we do a lot less frustrating. A second key is that we always want to be consistent. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I can't remember everything that I've done in a day. For example, did I make the title on this slide 18 point, 36 point, 24 point, and what font did I use? Well, when we use styles, we don't have to remember those things. And we, either as individual users of a document or when we collaborate with others, can all be formatting things the same way. So all of our titles and body text and captions and other types of text within the document all look the same without having to remember it and with easy application. That, of course, ties into our next bullet point, which is collaboration. Styles can be used in a document and they travel with the document. So if I create a document on my computer and I send it to you, you will now have access to those same styles. As we were saying in the previous point, that means you don't have to spend any time trying to figure out exactly what I did to format headings. You can simply apply the heading style that I've supplied with the document. That makes collaboration, again, much easier. Now we're going to start to see how things cycle around, because through all of this, even when we get to collaboration, that means that we're going to be more efficient when we collaborate, and we're going to have consistency because different people will not be doing different things, and this takes us back up to the top of the list. Hopefully these are a few things that can help you see why the use of styles really isn't any more difficult and in fact makes our work with documents much simpler, much easier, much more efficient, and much more consistent. A few seconds ago I mentioned that there were some features that may not be available unless you use styles or that may be enhanced if you do use styles, and we want to talk about what a few of those are. Remember that one of the views we have of a document is the outline view. When we use styles, we have the ability to expand and collapse that outline to different levels without having to do any extra work. Using styles also gives us the ability to utilize some navigation tools. Things like the navigation pane and browse by object come to mind. We also can use the Go To feature, for example, go to different headings. All of these things make working, especially with longer or more complex documents, much easier. One of the big ones on my list is a table of contents, and I'll tell you a little story here very quickly. The last real job I had, meaning the last one where I actually worked for somebody, was in part to put together an annual report. Because the people who I worked with absolutely refused to use styles, they manually formatted everything, it honestly took me 2 to 3 days just to put together the table of contents for this document. If they would have been willing to use styles, it would not have added any extra time to their creation of the body of the document, but I could have created the table of contents literally in just a few minutes instead of several days. I also can guarantee that then the table of contents headings would have exactly matched what was in the document. And although I'm very detail-oriented, anytime we have to recreate things like a table of contents by hand, there are bound to be some problems. In other words, some inconsistencies, possibly even some wrong page numbers, and some inconsistencies between the headings in the document and the table of contents itself. By using styles, we can automatically generate things like this based on the styles. Styles also determine the hierarchy or the layout. So, as I said, and as we'll see later on in this series, generating things like a table of contents becomes simply a matter of a couple of clicks when styles are fully implemented. We'll be working with styles in several places throughout the rest of this series, but I've put a quick little capture of one of the lists that you might see related to styles so that you can see it here. It shows the style name in a WYSIWYG or what you see is what you get format, and on the right it designates the type of style via a little icon so we can tell without having to actually apply the style itself. Now that I've completely convinced you of the need to use styles and why they are such a wonderful thing, let's talk for just a second about the types of styles we're going to see when we get to work in our document. There are just a few. First of all, we have character styles, followed by paragraph styles, something known as a linked style, list styles, and also table styles. I think the names are pretty self-explanatory. Just like formatting characters and paragraphs and lists and tables, we can apply these things, or rather save these things and then apply them as styles themselves. So everything you already know is simply going to be captured in the style. It's not learning anything new, it's just taking that final step to capture it and save it so we can reuse it. Sometimes people want to know where styles actually come from. Well, generally they're part of the template on which a document is based. So when you open a new blank document, that is based off of the normal template. That means that the normal template and all of its styles are available. The default normal template actually includes several styles that you may or may not be aware of. They include the normal style. This is what we consider to be just plain text. When we open a Word document and start typing, all of that text by default is in the normal style. It also has some others that we'll play with here in just a few minutes, primarily headings 1 through 3, also something called the default paragraph font, a normal table, something called no list, and there are several others that may be available depending on the exact template that you're working with. As we get to work, you're going to see where all of these styles already exist, how to apply them, and even how to create new ones. But sometimes people want to know how things are updated when we use styles. Well, styles can be stored either within an individual file or they can be attached to the template. In other words, they're kind of local or global. Those are some terms that you'll sometimes hear. Local styles stay local when they're added or modified. So if I'm working with a local style and I change it somehow, it's going to be kept within that file as well. If styles are stored in the template, however, and then we modify them from our document, we're going to be prompted to update the template when we close the file. And we'll be given two options. If we say yes to updating, that's going to save the modification to the file and the template. In other words, our changes, say to what a heading 1 looks like, are going to be available in both places. If we say no to updating, though, in that case the modification is only going to be saved in our local file, and we're not going to be changing what heading 1 looks like for the template itself. It really isn't too difficult of a concept, but if you haven't worked with local and global types of things before, and certainly if you haven't worked with styles, this is just something that I know comes up often in questions. After all, though, what we all know is the best way to work with all of this is to actually get to work and use it. So that's